Welcome back to another edition of Irish Illustrated Spotlight. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined for the third straight week by Tim Priester. And Tim, today we have a special spotlight situation. We had planned to get together and talk about the final installment of your Facts, Figures, and Futures schedule preview, which is basically November this time around, with the highlight being Florida State. But in recent days, a personal friend of yours and a man that most Notre Dame fans will remember as the athletic director who presided over Notre Dame's most recent and last national championship in 1988, Dick Rosenthal, passed away.
Yeah, we will. Just a reminder, we will talk about those last four opponents. But I wanted an opportunity to talk about Dick Rosenthal, who had a tremendous impact and influence on my life. His oldest son, John, is still a very dear friend. And spent a lot of time, personally spent a lot of time in the Rosenthal house growing up. And then, as fate would have it, here I am 5 years after starting my job. Dick Rosenthal is the athletic director at Notre Dame. So some interesting dynamics. But, I looked at the obituary today, and obviously I had some very kind and flowery things to say about him in my commentary. But when I looked at the obituary, which I think his son John had a lot to do with, it's very accurate, because when you see comments like exemplary athlete, businessman, community leader, and loyal son of Notre Dame, he was all of that. And I think I know that we too frequently throw around the term Notre Dame man too easily and frequently, but if this guy isn't who that was, I don't know who would be, because he really, he walked the walk. He was a true Christian man, and John said something to me yesterday about, if you were a friend, you were family. And that was exactly, how I was treated. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'm probably not sitting here without the influence of Dick Rosenthal in my life, because he played an integral role in my admission into Notre Dame. I mean, I know he wrote a letter of recommendation, but when Dick Rosenthal is writing a letter of recommendation for you, and when Jerry Hamas, the son of Romy Hamas, of whom the bookstores are named after, when you have letters of recommendation like that, you're in pretty good shape. But Dick was fantastic, and vacationed with the family and those kind of things. But that's all personal. The professional stuff, as the athletic director at Notre Dame for 9 years, brought Notre Dame into the Big East with their Olympic sports, which was hugely needed at the time. The NBC contract, I know people complain about they should look for a different broadcast partner, and you don't like the announcers, but the fact that Notre Dame
had one, the fact that they had that contract. Yes.
And it was for those that are subscribers, check out my Thursday Thoughts, because it explains what led up to that. Notre Dame thought that it was going to be one network covering everything, and that would have excluded them from, going out to USC and being a national broadcast, at least not in every instance. So Rosenthal had to do something. He checked with CBS and he met with NBC, and the more they talked about it, the more they realized that they had a partnership. And then, amongst former Notre Dame wrestlers, it was during the Dick Rosenthal regime that the wrestling program was canceled, but there was a purpose behind that, and that was to equalize things with Title IX and having equal opportunities for female athletes. And Dick Rosenthal was at the forefront of that. So a great man on many levels, personally, professionally, and of course, he is the last Notre Dame athletic director to be associated with a national title in football.
Yeah, and I bring that up because as a kid, which I was when Rosenthal succeeded Gene Corrigan as athletic director, I only knew him from old Notre Dame programs for his basketball exploits for Notre Dame. And then I, of course, as a 13-year-old, 12-year-old, did not know he was a successful local banker or anything like that. So when I heard he was hired as the athletic director, I never gave it a second thought. As a kid in high school or in grade school, when I read your column, I was like, wow, that is a little bit out of left field that he was hired as the athletics director.
Well, yeah, it definitely was. And when he became president of St. Joe Bank and Trust in South Bend, he was 29 years old. He was literally the youngest bank president in the United States. But that's the kind of guy that he was. But yeah, a great basketball player, All-American. When he left Notre Dame, he was all-time leading scorer. When he left Notre Dame, he was Notre Dame's all-time leading personal foul player for Notre Dame.
Bruce Flowers got him on that one, I'm assuming.
Yeah. His quote was, "They give you 5 fouls. It's wasteful if you don't use them all." So that was part of the humor that he would show as well. But yeah, I mean, and certainly Jack Swarbrick had to deal with more volatile times than Swarbrick did, who followed Gene Corrigan. Moose Krause was a huge influence on Dick Rosenthal. I think I've told that story before, where because Gene Corrigan had left for the ACC, so here's Dick Rosenthal. He's an AD. He doesn't really have a mentor, but he had played. He had been recruited by Moose Krause to play basketball, and he actually played baseball as well. And he tells a story of how Moose would. Dick would go to him with questions, but he wouldn't give him the answer. He would turn it around and ask Dick himself questions, so that by the time they were done with the give and take and answering questions, Moose had made him feel like he had come up with the answers on his own, but it was just Moose's way of just trying to get him to a conclusion and a decision. So it was pretty cool, but awesome guy. And a lot of people, and I appreciate all of our subscribers saying that, condolences for my loss. And I do take it that way, because he did make me feel like part of the family, but he was 91 and he was not in good physical health. And so as a Christian, I look at it and say, thank you, God, for taking him, because it was time.
If you didn't get a chance to read that, it appeared on Wednesday morning. Richard A. Dick Rosenthal, a tribute written by Tim Priester, and it's a beautiful piece. And I think for those that didn't know Rosenthal, they can read that and know more about the man and also what he did for Notre Dame. And also, as Tim said, in Thursday Thoughts as well. Now, we did gather originally, or the plan to gather was to wrap up your series. It's important, Facts, Figures, and Futures, because you're moving on to the more well-known series, First Rate, where subscribers can get angry with you, where you rate Notre Dame's position groups against others on the schedule, although they can't be too mad at number one, because quarterback came in at number one. But right now, our final focus for this is basically the month of November. It's games 9 through 12, highlighted. This is the first time, and this speaks to the schedule, where it's highlighted by 2 national powerhouses in Florida State to open the month and USC to close the month. I want to start with Florida State, but do a quick overview of the schedule situation. My first thought, and I saw it attached to your story on USC, I believe, it's a lot like 2018 that Notre Dame has to go north to New York and to LA to end this month. However, they begin the month with a bye prior to hosting Florida State at home. In 2018, Notre Dame preceded November with a trip to San Diego, then to Northwestern for a true road game, and then started the rest of their month of November. So this is a little bit easier than it was in 2018.
Yeah, we've talked about this before with 2 bye weeks, and I think just about everybody has 2 bye weeks. Notre Dame plays 5 games bye, 3 games bye, 4 games, and so that certainly does help. But the travel will be noteworthy. 4 of Notre Dame's last 6 games will be on the road, and 2 trips to New York and USC mixed in there. But Florida State, I know a lot of people are looking at, you're going to catch Florida State in November, and that certainly is a factor.
It is better than mid-September.
No doubt about it. That's a factor. But if you're counting on, weather and Florida State not coming to play, keep in mind that Mike Norvell is the head coach there. He's firmly entrenched. They were very good last year. They lost a lot. There's no doubt about it. Jared Verse, first-round draft pick, the defensive end, wide receiver Keon Coleman, second-rounder, and then Braden Fisk, who I still lament that didn't come to Notre Dame, the defensive lineman. He was a second-rounder, and then a cornerback, running back, and cornerback, all picked before the 4th round. And, by the way, Jordan Travis, their quarterback, a 5th-rounder, is gone as well. So they've lost a ton, but they've brought in a ton, including 5 Alabama players. And like most of the best Alabama players don't transfer out. So these are guys that are unhappy for whatever reason, probably generally speaking for a lack of playing time, but it's still 5 guys from Alabama, plus DJ Uiagalelei, who is well-traveled, 3rd team, 57% completion rate last year, but a 6'4", 55-pounder. I mean, I see some people say, "Oh, he stinks." Well, he doesn't stink.
Right.
But
He can have his days.
yeah, he's a presence. There's no doubt about that. But he has struggled with consistency in interceptions and accuracy. But still, you lose Jordan Travis, you bring in an ultra experienced quarterback like him, and Notre Dame has to be prepared for that.
And I'd like to point out Notre Dame did handle Florida State in the freezing cold in 2018, the season we're talking about. That Florida State team was picked to finish second. Willie Taggart was the coach. They had lost 2 in a row and were a below 500 team, and had recently lost 59-10 to Clemson in the famous game where you see the shirtless man reading the book in the stands. That is the Florida State team that came in last time. That's not the Florida State team that comes in this time. I think the talent infusion, but DJ Uiagalelei is an important part of this story, Tim, because he doesn't stink, but he has days where he stinks, and Notre Dame's defense has the ability to make that work. I really want to talk to the Florida State writers at 24/7 and elsewhere, because they mentioned that the spring was not a overly successful combination of getting to know the wide receivers and the quarterback. I bet you that is the case in a lot of places nationwide, but it's notable at Florida State because they certainly need some chemistry there.
Yeah, we'll really get into that with USC, because that's a complete overhaul with not only at quarterback, but at wide receiver. But yeah, it makes me think when you mentioned Uiagalelei in terms of if L. Golden and the veteran Notre Dame defense last year did what they did to Caleb Williams,
right?
DJ's in a little bit of trouble facing this defense, because they're going to have something for him, and so that's to Notre Dame's advantage, no doubt about it. I do love their jumping over to the other side of the football. They still have some components. Patrick Payton had 7 sacks as a young guy last year. Defensive end Joshua Farmer 5. Their secondary is very good. I know a lot of people I'm anticipating that I will be rating Florida State's secondary ahead of Notre Dame's, just because it's a little bit deeper in proven talent. Fentrell Cypress II is originally from Virginia. He was an all ACC pick, and they've got some good players there. They have a great kicker in Ryan Fitzgerald, who was 19 of 21 last season. They have an excellent punter as well. So maybe the best and most consistent punter in the nation. So let's not fool ourselves here into thinking that, Florida State had 1 year as an upstart. Now they're going to fall back. They may not be 13-1 again, but it's still going to be very much a challenge for Notre Dame.
I mean, on paper, I think, just strictly on paper in the summer, it's the second hardest game situation for Notre Dame, because the hardest one's on the road. I still think it's a little harder than the USC at the end of the year. I think USC could have some attrition by then. Maybe 2A and 2B for Florida State at home, USC on the road. But they probably have a better team than Texas A&M.
I think so. Now, keep in mind that I saw this stat the other day. I think I've said it. A&M has 8 former 5-star players, that when they were coming out of high school. So, that's a talented group too. And, the dynamics, the setting, and the time of year are all going to be very, 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 very different, but it's Mike Norvell. It's taken a while. Those first couple of years were rocky. But it's becoming a good football program again. They have depth at running back because they've got Roydell Williams from Alabama. They had a transfer from Indiana, Jalen Lucas. So they're deep at running back. They have an excellent freshman running back by the name of Cam Davis. And then Lawrence Toafili, who's been there for like 12 years or so. Their running back room, I'm probably going to have to list them ahead of Notre Dame as well, just because of the experience and numbers, even though they lost a third-round draft pick in Trey Benson, who was very good last year.
Well, we're going to segue to Virginia here simply because you mentioned Fentrell Cypress. He's from Virginia, and Tim Priester, had he been at Virginia still, that team would have the 2 safeties mentioned on Lindy's list as top 10 safeties in the country. Cypress, though, is at Florida State. Jonas Sanker is in Virginia. Virginia fought last year the good fight at times, but finished 3-9 under Tony Elliott. And as you mentioned, stopping the run, running the ball, it could be an issue.
Yeah, they can't stop the run. They're a bad football team. Now, they had a bunch of close games. Where are my numbers on that? I mean, they lost.
Five of 9 were by a total of 17 points.
Right. They lost to Louisville by 7, Miami by 3, Boston College by 3, NC State by 3. I think those are accurate. So, but as you mentioned, Tim, defensively, they have really, really struggled. Opponents scored 33.5 points per game last year. That was 116th, and 27 rushing touchdowns, which is a bunch. That's 118th. They had a ton of injuries. John Rodzinski is their defensive coordinator. This was a Lindy stat. They had more than 1,400 snaps from freshman defensive players. You're not going to be any good. You are not going to be any good when you're in those circumstances. But all things being equal, that should not be the case this year for their defense. And then they have a couple of quarterbacks, a Tony and an Anthony, Tony Musket and Anthony Calandrea, who was a freshman last year. And in terms of playing experience, that duo is probably the most experienced 1-2 punch on Notre Dame's schedule this year. So they've got a little bit there, but this is a make or break year for Tony Elliott. In this day and age, the 5-year contracts aren't worth a whole lot. It's, you better be producing after 3 years. And right now they are 6-16 in the last 2 years. Now they had the on-campus tragedy in Charlottesville, and so that has played into that. Isn't brought up enough. I mean, we have all these football stats, and then you mentioned a real human life experience where an entire campus and football program they canceled a couple games, so that impacted them as well. But Tony Elliott is they're going to have to do a whole lot better. They have 15 starters coming back, and a bunch of those close losses, but they're going to have to be way better running the football and defending the run.
2 related Notre Dame notes. They lost Malik Washington, 1,400 yards, NFL draft, ran a 4.47. He's a transfer from Northwestern, graduate transfer to West Virginia. And I bring that up because Notre Dame could have had Malik Washington last season on its football team. 4.47 NFL draft, 1,400 yards.
Would have made a massive difference. I think it was 110 receptions last year, and he was a difference maker for them. And they do have,
Chris Tyree is another.
Yes, I was going to say they do have a young man by the name of Chris Tyree, and so he's going to help, their passing game. Sage Ennis, remember that name, the tight end from Clemson?
Yes,
he is transferred there as well. He was caught behind Jake Brenningstool, but he's a pretty good player as well. So they have some components, and Chris Tyree, obviously Virginia is very excited about him coming back home. They also have Malachi Fields, who caught 58 passes and scored 5 touchdowns last year. So he was a solid 1-2 punch with Malik Washington, and will be at the forefront with Chris Tyree this year.
Game number 11 is Army, and that is back to New York, but there is a solid 1-week break, plus the 2 games in between when they fly back to New York for Navy Game 8 and Army Game 11. Jeff Monken is in year 10, which explains how, or defies how fast time moves in my life, because I cannot believe Jeff Monken is in year 10 at Army. 2-6 to start last year, correct? But finished 6-6, and he's had a successful run.
Yeah, he has. He's 70-55 in 9 seasons at Army, and that is not easy. That's the best record since Jim Young, who during a 7-year span from 83 to 90 had a slightly better record than Todd Monken, but that's impressive. Now, they've joined the American Athletic Conference, and I don't know how to read this because I don't see those teams play on a weekly basis, but Navy has been in that conference for a while, and Navy was going 7-1 and 6-2 in the conference for a while, and then the rest of the group seemed to catch up. So I know Navy is changing their offense a little bit, but it's still pretty much the same sleight of hand, a slightly different approach that we can address at another time. But Army needs to run the football better. They need to stop the run a little bit better. They average, when an option team averages 4.35 yards per carry,
right,
that's way below what you need to be. And their third down percentage is below par as well, just 37.8, and that's hugely significant for an option team as well. They had some success on fourth down, but really not enough to compensate. So, they have some issues. They did get news after the spring that one of their veteran offensive linemen, I don't know what the issue was. They weren't sure whether he was going to be back for a fifth year. He is, so that helps. But they've got to do a better job in fourth quarter. They've been outscored 88-54, or they were last year. They had a couple really bad losses to Massachusetts and Louisiana Monroe. They lost to Louisiana Monroe, and Louisiana Monroe lost their last 10 games of the season.
Well, I think that's a good, when you bring up the rushing attack and losing to teams like that. When Army and Navy are right, they don't lose to teams like that.
Yeah.
Unless it's game one. Sometimes you see Navy has a terrible hiccup, and then they go out and play Notre Dame and play much better back in the day. But they need their rushing attacks to work. And you mentioned the fact that low on starters returning. You had one of your subheads was this is the Elite Eight, but they got a ninth starter returning out of the entire 22. And it's pretty important for them. Bryson Daly is back at quarterback. And I think you mentioned 64-65 returning offensive line starts. So that's a good foundation.
And Bryson Daly is he's a physical runner. He's 215 pounds. So you would expect, in addition to the deception, he's going to break some tackles along the way. He passed for 917 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he was working mainly out of the shotgun last year. Now they're not going to do that this year. Excuse me. So it'll be interesting to see how effective he is. But he did throw for 913 yards and 7 touchdowns, and he rushed for 901 yards and 7 scores. So he's a dual threat. We'll see how their offensive approach impacts that. But they're really happy with him, and with him back, they feel like they've got the foundation of something good with him at quarterback.
Final game of the season, Thanksgiving Saturday. I am booked. Tim Prister, jump on that soon for your flight out. USC for Manhattan Beach. Yes, that's
on that, Tim.
We can't. Well, we can't fly together this time because I got to go from Chicago for that flight. Right. So I know you're going from South Bend, but
yeah.
Final game of the series, USC Notre Dame. The record I like to point out for USC is, I think, something you wrote prior to this. Lincoln Riley's 19-8 as Marcus Freeman, including his bowl loss.
Isn't it?
Took over. And remember when Lincoln Riley, we walked off that field 2 years ago, and it seemed like Lincoln Riley and USC may never lose again because they had Caleb Williams coming back, and you figured the Pete Carroll recruiting machine might come back to USC. That has not been the case, and they have, if you're going by historical guides, the all-time toughest schedule you're ever going to see. Of course, that's not how you really judge it. But LSU, Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Washington are all on their schedules. I think that, and UCLA. So that's 7 of the top 30 winning.
Yeah, and it's not like the first half is front loaded and there's nothing on the back end. It's going to be a battle for them throughout. And I'll tell you what concerns from a Notre Dame perspective. What's the most concerning thing is them landing the UCLA defensive coordinator, Danton Lynn. He, in 1 year at UCLA, he turned them around completely, and that's exactly what USC needs. I'm trying to find my stats here on exactly what Lynn. Okay, here you go. UCLA went from allowing 29 points per game in 2022 to being number 14 in the country in scoring defense, 10th in total defense, 2nd in rushing defense, 8th in yards per snap, which is only 3 behind Notre Dame's defense. So that's concerning. You still got to have the players, and they do. I mean, they do have. Again, if you look at our list from the facts, figures, and futures story, it's a long list of talent drain and personnel infusion, including 2 of the best players on the Oregon State defense that didn't play in the Sun Bowl, Mascarenas Arnold and Akili Arnold from Oregon State. Both of them will be in the starting lineup for USC this year. So that's the red flag for me. And look, they're still they've got to prove themselves on offense. You don't have the given with Caleb Williams anymore, and they're really not sure who the starter is, even though Moss did an outstanding job in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville. But But Louisville was depleted for that bowl game.
Plus, the Holiday Bowl makes your stats go up like 25% for every quarterback that's ever played in it. That's something about it.
Seems to do that. So, again, an interesting team. So much water under the bridge before Notre Dame plays them, but just a little heads up because the key for me though is the defense, getting the defensive coordinator from UCLA.
5 new defensive backs too, basically 5 new defensive back with an early enrollee freshman, 4 transfers. I talked about this prior, and I think on our Irish Illustrated Insider podcast, I think that hurts them more for LSU and Michigan early on, trying to get 5 new guys to work together back there. Yeah. If there's going to be success in the defensive backfield, it will be by the end of the year. If those guys can stay healthy, they will probably be a better defensive backfield, assuming the pass rush is there game 12 than they are game 1 and 3.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Tim. And then, jumping back over to the offensive side of the ball, the offensive line still has to prove itself. It has not been a consistent group. They've had good individuals, but it hasn't been, a really consistent group for them. And then they lost Marshawn Lloyd. And I don't know if I ever said this publicly. I think we talked about it, but I'm going to say it now. I would have picked Marshawn Lloyd ahead of Audric Estime.
Yeah, you loved Marshawn Lloyd.
That's how much I love Lloyd's game. And he averaged like 7.8 yards per carry. He's an absolute beast. Well, he's gone, but they did get a transfer from Mississippi State. Now check out this guy. First of all, it's Joquavius Marks. They call him Woody. So Woody Marks from Mississippi State, 4 years, rushed for almost 1,900 yards and 22 touchdowns. At running back, caught 214 passes for 1,200 yards and 5 touchdowns. So this is an interesting back. This is a guy that's going to get a lot of touches. I loved Marshawn Lloyd's game, but they do have Woody Marks coming in their offensive backfield to join Quentin Joyner, who has a minimal amount of experience behind him.
And it's that trip out. I put this in Monday Musings, and I can attach it here to the chat so we see it. When Notre Dame goes out to USC favored, which is what we anticipate as Notre Dame analysts will happen in this season, because even if USC has a good team, they have murderer's row set up before Notre Dame. USC plays Notre Dame tough in this game. That you could rarely can you throw spreads out the window. People say that all the time, but they're there for a reason. USC as an underdog at home against Notre Dame has been a tough draw for the Irish. They played Notre Dame way too tough in 2012 and 2018.
Well, nobody can account for the fact better than you how nervous I am when I'm in the Coliseum and Notre Dame's undefeated.
Yeah.
I'm rocking back and forth the whole game. No, it's you can't assume it. And I'm old enough because I can go back to although I don't remember, but I've heard enough about it and talked to former players about the 1964 game when Notre Dame was up 17-0, was on the verge of completing an undefeated regular season. And it's Lincoln Riley's Lincoln Riley. And although he's 19-8, which is the exact same record that Marcus Freeman has, he's still Lincoln Riley, who did amazing things at Oklahoma before he came to USC. So again, a lot of water under the bridge between now and then, but it's Notre Dame USC. It's one of the great rivalries in the country.
And because I can't fit this story anywhere else, you said you're sometimes scared in the USC press box of what might happen. Well, hopefully when we walk down the Coliseum steps this year, an usher won't yell to get the angry fans to move out of our way as the game is ending. Notre Dame media coming through as the Irish finish an undefeated season as he did in 2012.
Stop it. What are you saying? Yeah. Yeah. An angry mob as we work our way down to the field.
For Tim Priester, I'm Tim O'Malley. This has been another edition of Irish Illustrated Spotlight, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.